So thank you, Roger.
Well, thank you, Paul. I appreciate the generous introduction. I'm speaking to you from the traditional land of the Waikato Tainui in Aotearoa, so New Zealand. And it is a great honour, special privilege really for me to be part of the Riverland Academy of Clinical Excellence. So I thank you very much for the invitation to share experiences from Northern Ontario, and with a specific focus on creating a sustainable, fit-for-purpose health workforce. So I'm now going to see if I can get it to work and share slides. Let me know if you can't see my slides. I'm not hearing anyone saying you can't see them, so I'm hoping.
Perfect, Roger. Working very well, and we can still see you.
Yeah, good. Okay, so that's good to know too. I'm not very often using Teams for this sort of thing, so I'm just doing the best I can, really. So that's my topic: creating a sustainable, fit-for-purpose health workforce, and drawing on the Northern Ontario experience. And what I'm going to do is briefly introduce some evidence-based concepts before presenting you the story of Northern Ontario School of Medicine, and particularly research or outcomes from tracking and impact research, which we undertook. And then finally, I'm going to share some lessons learned that I think might be relevant to you. So let's see if the slides will change now. Yes, okay, so you can see that I have no conflicts of interest. And my first concept that I want to introduce is a fit-for-purpose health workforce. So there's been a growing recognition over the last couple of decades, really, that it's not just about a need for more health workforce, but a particular kind of health workforce. Health care providers who have the right skills and provide the right care in the right place at the right time. So it's all got to be right, but also with skills of being of leadership, communications, and being team players, always focusing on responding to the health needs of the population that they're serving. And then there's the issue of the mix and distribution within health professions, between health professions, geographically, specialists and generalists, and also at levels of the healthcare system, primary care and the other levels. The next concept is about the facilitators of success in recruitment and actually really retention of rural practitioners. So the factor that's most strongly associated with going into rural practice after education and training is a rural upbringing, having grown up in a rural area. The second factor is positive, and I emphasize the word positive, clinical and educational experiences in the rural setting as part of undergraduate education. And then the third factor is after graduation, training that prepares the graduate for a career in rural practice. The next concept is recognizing that health services that actually address the needs of local populations in rural communities are different from health service models in the cities. And you can't assume that people in rural communities will be prepared to travel to access specialist services. I mean, an example is I was in rural general practice in a town called Moe, which is about 2 hours east of Melbourne, for nearly 20 years. And twice I had patients choose to go blind rather than travel 2 hours to the closest ophthalmologist. So rural communities have different expectations, and services that meet their needs are not the same models as in the big cities. And therefore, the role of specialists, if really important, is a true consultant role, supporting the local providers as the frontline providers of care. The next concept is social accountability. And I like to show these two definitions. The one in the upper part of the slide is from the World Bank. And I emphasize this one because it talks about civic or community engagement and the community holding service providers and public officials to account for the services they deliver. Now, the definition in the lower part of the slide is actually the more commonly used definition and been around since 1995 from the World Health Organization in relation to academic institutions. And it is that the social accountability of academic institutions is that all of their activities, education, research, and service are dedicated to addressing the priority health concerns of the population that they have a mandate to serve. Okay, so there's some introductory concepts. Now let's move on to Canada. This is Canada, and if you're looking at the map, the south of Canada is the United States of America. These are Great Lakes here. This is the province of Ontario. This is a city called Thunder Bay, a population of about 120,000. This is Sudbury, about 160,000. They're 1,000 kilometres apart. So let's look more closely at Ontario. So this is a demographic map. So it's the population distribution of Northern Ontario. So there's Thunder Bay, there's Sudbury as hotspots in population. There are 3 other communities in Northern Ontario that are 50,000 or more, and all the rest have a population of 10,000 or less. So Northern Ontario, which is essentially, this is the boundary between the southern part of Ontario that has about 12 plus million people, and the northern part of Ontario, which is over 800,000 square kilometres with less than 800,000 populations. So small populations, large distances, a boom-bust economy, resource-based economy, so mining, forestry, tourism. That's Northern Ontario, and Northern Ontario has never had enough doctors and other providers of healthcare. And so that was the background, really, that in 2000, 2001, people right across Northern Ontario said, if we're ever going to have enough doctors and other health workforce, if we're ever going to improve the health of the people and the communities of Northern Ontario, we need our own standalone Northern Ontario School of Medicine. And unusual in my experience, but the government of Ontario actually accepted that message. And so in 2002, my wife, Professor Sarah Strasser, and our 5 children moved from Australia to Canada and joined others in establishing Northern Ontario School of Medicine. The school was opened officially, accepted the first students in 2005, and was set up to serve as the Faculty of Medicine of the 2 universities, Laurentian University in Sudbury, Lakehead University in Thunder Bay, 1,000 kilometres apart, as I said, and with a social accountability mandate. That's a commitment to improve the health of the people and the communities of Northern Ontario. There was also a commitment to innovation. Distributed community-engaged learning is the distinctive model of medical education and health research that we developed in Northern Ontario. Distributed means that there are actually over 90 sites where the students and the trainees and the other health professional learners may undertake part of their clinical learning. To make this work, of course, these sites have to be connected electronically and to be connected both in real time and asynchronously. And we have an extensive digital library service, which means that if you have access to the internet, you have access to educational resources and information, pretty much the same as if you're in the big city teaching hospital. But the centerpiece of distributed community-engaged learning is community engagement. The interdependent partnerships that Northern Ontario School of Medicine, NOSM, has with the communities right across Northern Ontario. So this is a map that shows you the distribution, the 90 plus sites across Northern Ontario and some into the south of Ontario as well. And the color coding shows you where different students and in different programs have their placements. So let's just highlight this top one, Indigenous communities, and you can see that includes the most remote communities in the far north of Northern Ontario, and you can only access those communities by airplane, or in the winter they cut ice roads to bring in heavy equipment and supplies. Now, the medical students at NOSM in their first year have 4 weeks living and learning in these Indigenous communities, including the remote First Nations, and they're there to learn from the community about the history, the tradition, the culture, the social and the health issues. And NOSM was the first medical school, I think still the only medical school in the world, where all of the medical students have this immersive cultural experience, a community, integrated community experience right in their first year of study. In second year, the students have 2 4-week integrated community experiences where they're actually, that's a clinical experience. They're in the smaller communities, 5,000 population or less, and they're attached to the doctors and the health professional team and they're starting to have more clinical experiences in those small communities. And then in the third year, the students leave Thunder Bay, they leave Sudbury, and they move to one of 15 other communities in Northern Ontario. They actually live in that community for the entire academic year, which is 8 months. And they're based in general practice, family practice, and essentially they see patients. So you might say the curriculum walks through the door. The first patient might be pregnant, that's obstetrics. The next patient might be a child, that's pediatrics. The next patient might have a surgical problem. The learning outcomes for this principal clinical year for our students are just the same in the 6 core clinical disciplines as happens in the other medical schools that have block rotations for their principal clinical year. Now, I'm thinking that this model may sound familiar to you, especially in the Riverland, because in the Riverland, or for Australia, the first longitudinal integrated clerkship was in the Riverland. It was known as the Riverland program, or the Parallel Rural Community Curriculum. And we drew very much on the experience, the Flinders University experience, and we had Professor Worley and others from Flinders coming over and helping us in preparing to offer what we call a comprehensive community clerkship. And nevertheless, NOSM is the first medical school in the world where all of the students, their principal clinical year is a longitudinal integrated clerkship. And it's actually only in the final year, in the 4th year, that the students have direct teaching by specialists and subspecialists in the tertiary care hospitals in Thunder Bay and in Sudbury. So this slide gives you an overview of all of the academic activities of the school. I've already mentioned, or Paul mentioned actually, and on the previous slide, there were colour coding for placing a whole range of other health professional learners. So the school is much involved in producing a whole range of members of the health workforce. And this highlighted upper part of the slide shows what I used to describe as the life cycle of a practitioner, rural practitioner in Northern Ontario. We actually had over now a few years ago, Dennis Lennox came to visit us in Northern Ontario. Dennis Lennox was the medical administrator in Queensland who actually developed the concept and then persuaded, with a lot of help from others, Queensland Health to introduce the rural generalist pathway in Queensland, which of course now, and again, Professor Will is much involved in transferring that rural generalist pathway around Australia and across health professional disciplines beyond medicine. And so anyway, I'll come back to the rural generalist pathway in Northern Ontario, but I do want to highlight that this starts really in high school. So the Health Sciences Summer Camp, or now called Camp Med, students from the communities right across Northern Ontario come in the summer. They spend a week at the university campus and with students and academic staff, and they're essentially exploring they're making various connections between what they study at high school and health careers. So it's very much motivating them to see a future for themselves in a health career, and that's really, it's not the only activity of encouraging high school or young people in Northern Ontario to see themselves as future physicians or doctors or other health professionals, but it's an important element of that pathway. And then the others you can see, undergraduate, postgraduate, continuing education. The Master of Medical Studies is a graduate studies program by distributed learning, which means that the academic staff, the faculty members of the school who are doctors and nurses and others can actually undertake graduate studies, trained to be researchers and undertake research in their own community and clinical setting rather than having to move to a larger centre. Lots of interprofessional education, and the research at the school, the research activities of NOSM are very much guided by social accountability. That is, addressing research questions, the answer for which makes a difference to the health of the people of Northern Ontario. Okay, so now I'm going to share some of the outcomes from our tracking and impact research over a number of years in Northern Ontario, starting with the admissions process. So with our social accountability mandate, we aim to reflect the population distribution of Northern Ontario in each class and with an admissions process that favours applicants from Northern Ontario. You can see that we've been pretty successful. In the first 10 years, 92% of the students have grown up in Northern Ontario. The other 8% actually come from remote and rural parts of the rest of Canada. So it's rare to have a student who comes from a big city like Toronto, but the exceptions may be if they're from a French language background, Francophones, or they're Indigenous. About 40% of the students are from remote and rural communities, which does reflect the demographics of Northern Ontario. 7% Indigenous was actually lower than our target of 12%. So as a result of this research, we tweaked the admissions process. So in recent years, we've been hitting that 12% target in terms of Indigenous students. Before I leave this slide, I do want to just highlight this number. GPA stands for grade point average. It's a number out of 4. And, you know, at least we heard from Toronto that we must have lowered academic standards to let in all those dumb Northerners. Well, in fact, 3.7 is about the same academic standard as new students going into all of the medical schools in Canada. So what about the student experience? You can see from this slide from a couple of different studies that the students really have a very positive experience. They see they're learning from generalists and to be a generalist. They feel they see and actually learn more than students in the big city medical schools. But I think that last quotation, the one they've highlighted, really sums it up. You don't know it until you live it. You don't know it until you live it. Now, I mentioned generalists and generalism. We did a more specific study of the experience of our students and our graduates of generalism in rural practice. And you can see from this slide that their view is that generalism in rural practice is really a distinct field of endeavour in healthcare. It's not about being an alternative to urban specialist care. It's about providing services that address the health needs of the population, the rural population that they're serving. And you can see also, I highlighted in the bottom part of the slide, that the research showed that the experience at Northern helped shape their decision-making around career directions, specialty and location of practice. And so that's now reflected in this slide, which is about the career directions of the medical graduates from NOSM. The top half is from the undergraduate medical education program, or the MD program. 62% going into family medicine general practice, mostly rural. That's almost double the national average in Canada going into general practice. 33% other general specialties like general medicine, general surgery, pediatrics. And then the 5%, that's a really important, so that's subspecialties like dermatology, radiation oncology, neurology. And that 5% is important to us in Northern Ontario for 2 reasons. The first is that it shows, first is we need those kind of subspecialists in Northern Ontario. They have to go elsewhere for their training, but they do come back. They have been coming back. The second is that although we have a very different learning environment and curriculum model from the other medical schools, our students, our graduates, are competitive when it comes to matching to those training programs, for which there are a very small number of first-year places each year. There's a national, it's called residency training in Canada, there's a national residency match each year. And many years, most years, all of the NOSM students or graduates have been matched in the first round of the residency match. That hasn't happened for another medical school. That's the whole class being matched in the first round for over 30 years for other medical schools in Canada. So that's what happens to our graduates from the undergraduate. Now in Canada, medical schools run postgraduate education. And so NOSM provides a very large program in general practice, family medicine, and 8 other general specialties. And so you can see that 69, 70% of the graduates stay in Northern Ontario. And when you look at those who did their undergraduate and their postgraduate in Northern Ontario, 94% are practicing in Northern Ontario, including in the smaller remote rural communities.
A 2-minute warning, Professor Strasser.
Oh, what happens in 2 minutes?
It's just in terms of the time.
Oh, okay. I was wondering if there was a glass slipper or something, maybe a pumpkin. So looking at other health careers, you can see in terms of registered dietitians, 75% practicing in Northern Ontario, including in Indigenous communities, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, 4 times the Canadian average in rural and remote practice. And once again, that rural upbringing is such an important, and the length of time immersed in the rural setting. I won't dwell on this because I haven't got much time, but we did look at the economic impact of the school and found that for every dollar of taxpayers' money spent, there was more than $2 of new economic activity that wouldn't be there without a medical school in Northern Ontario. So for Northern Ontario, there are many benefits of NOSM, not just more doctors and other health professionals, but the kind of doctors and health professionals. So just a few insights from our experience to sort of draw this together. Community engagement is critical, and what we mean is interdependent partnerships where the communities are actively involved in the development and delivery of the curriculum and have a future recruitment opportunity, of course, if the students and their families feel at home in the community. Faculty members, academic staff being part of the school and wherever they are, a nurse in a small community, a neurosurgeon in Sudbury having the same opportunity for career progression and academic, moving up the ranks in terms of their academic standing. Very important to have formalized agreements, and so this was a media event, the first agreement that we signed outside of Sudbury and Thunder Bay in a place called Sault Ste. Marie. Immersive community engaged education really distilled from the research we've done that it's the intense interaction with patients that motivates the students to study hard and to do the best they can for their patients. So they develop that service orientation, that social accountability mindset, and they graduate as skilled generalists ready for their future career. And this is the rural generalist pathway as NOSM now describes it. You can see up the top the sort of time periods and starting at least in high school and going right through. So drawing this together, I've introduced you to some research-based concepts and then told you the story of the Northern Ontario School of Medicine with some lessons that we've learned as a basis for then looking at, well, what is it that really matters? And as you can see on this slide, context is critical, active community participation, and always setting standards that you measure yourself against your own standards, not against whatever they say in the big cities. So in conclusion, I would say that the NOSM experience, Northern Ontario experience, shows that to create a sustainable, fit-for-purpose health workforce, you can do that through immersive, community-engaged rural education and training pathways. There are some references that you can follow up for those who are interested, and of course it has my email address there at the bottom.
Thank you so much. Wow, what a run over so much research and input. Roger, can I ask you a question? What did you see as the impact on the health services themselves? How did they change over the 15 years that you were there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think the key, the first point is that we're talking about a part of Ontario, Northern Ontario, that there was a history of having medical students and other health professional students coming and going. But the institution actually saw the students as being attached to the practitioners, the doctors or the physiotherapists, the occupational therapists. And so that wasn't really something they saw themselves having a big role in other than being friendly. And because, of course, the purpose of this at that time was about recruitment, about future recruitment. It wasn't about the education and training in the sense of the core education and training of those students. So the big transition was for the health services to actually step up and to become partners, the institutions to become partners in the health professional education endeavour. And in fact, certainly for medical education, it's always been a three-way partnership. Well, not always. Going back to over 100 years to the Flexner report, that is a partnership between the academic institution, the university, the hospital, and what makes a teaching hospital is that partnership, and the doctors, and other health professionals who are the teachers. And so that was a big shift, that then the institutions see they have an obligation, and they're part of the education training system for the students.
Thank you. Any other questions from people? We have a couple of our interns, Professor Strasser. So go ahead, Barry.
Just quickly, so the retention of people that grew up in Northern Ontario was really quite good. Do you have statistics for what the retention was for people that didn't grow up in Northern Ontario that had travelled to the region, for the retention of them in the area?
Yeah, so that the bottom part of the slide had graduates from our postgraduate training, so the residency programs, and that was a mix of those who come from elsewhere and those who had done their training, the undergraduate in Northern Ontario. So, I mean, what we found is similar to other this kind of research, is that where the training occurs, so in your case, registrars do the bulk of their training, they're much more likely to settle into practice in that same geographic area.
Thank you.
I think there was another question.
Yeah, so I just had a quick question about when new programs start, there's often a lot of excitement surrounding them. There's a lot of people that are really eager to be involved. In the context of a program that you've now had the opportunity to watch over a decade now, did you find at any point in there was a lull in that motivation or excitement, and how did you address that?
Well, that's a really good question. Let me start off at the very beginning. So when as I said,
I have about a minute to answer it, Roger.
Okay, 5 children and I arrived in Northern Ontario. What we realised was that most people didn't, even though the government decided and announced there'd be a Northern Ontario School of Medicine, people didn't really believe it was going to happen. And that's a standard experience in rural areas. Government makes an announcement, nothing happens. The government makes another announcement, nothing happens, and then nothing happens. So why was it going to be different this time? So the first challenge was to persuade people to step up and really make it happen. And once they made it happen, I would say there are several points at which confidence really was boosted. First, when we admitted our first students in 2005, and then when we had our first graduation in 2009, and that was a celebration right across Northern Ontario. And then as we built our residency at postgraduate training as well. So there's certainly been ups and downs along the way. And one of the hardest aspects of the current situation is there are still small communities in particular that are really struggling to maintain medical services. And so that's part of the reason for formally establishing the rural generalist pathway, is to strengthen that link from one stage to the next in the education training pathway, and actually direct and prepare graduates to serve those communities that are most in need. Is that a minute? Yep, you're right.
Thank you very much, Roger. Thank you for those questions. I think we've heard the best evidence there is in the world around an integrated pathway, medical school, postgraduate training, community immersion and engagement, not just in medicine, but in other disciplines as well, where the same principles have been applied. What we also have is a colleague. Thank you very much, Professor Strasser. Thank you very much, Roger, for being with us today, and we look forward to collaborating with you further with your work in New Zealand and our work here in the Riverland Mallee Coorong. Nukken, and farewell to people. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.